So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Michael Doesn't Know What He's Doing. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone who watched the last video. I really wasn't expecting that kind of reception. Now, I did tell you to not like and subscribe, but you didn't listen to me, so thank you. I've been waffling on enough. On with the restoration. The car was running pretty good, but we couldn't run it for long, and we couldn't give it berries because the cooling system was absolutely non-existent. I didn't want to risk running it for too long, otherwise it shagged the motor. Since we've just spent all this time confirming it's good, I'd rather not break it. Now, there was only a fractional amount of coolant in the system, but it was a very pale green, so it doesn't mean it's been running on water. I had a look in the radiator, and look, it didn't look too great, but it didn't look terrible either. It was pretty rusted, but I did see a fair bit of open passageways, so I was hoping with a good amount of flush we could get it at least to a running condition. I'll probably have to replace it at some point, but that some point hopefully won't be today. So I thought I'd first start with the thermostat. That would give me a good indication of how bad the cooling system is inside the engine. Now, a thermostat is what an engine uses to regulate heat. It remains closed when the engine is cool, keeping the coolant inside the engine until it is hot enough. Then the valve opens, releasing the coolant into the radiator so that it can be cooled. Often when these go bad, the engine can't regulate its heat, and you'll often see your temperature gauge going up and down because the valve is sticking and the engine can't release coolant that needs to be cooled. In the worst of cases, they get seized and won't open at all. Given this thing had been sitting for 17 years, I really didn't want to take that chance. Now, of course, because everything's cruddy and old, it's seized. Oh, and whoever designed these, there's a special place in hell for you.
These pretzels are making me thirsty!
Or how the tables have turned.
Whoa, the tangerine fantasy that came out of this thing. Crunchy. So there was absolutely no way that just replacing the thermostat would fix this. So I pulled the thermostat housing off, and I pulled the thermostat that was stuck in there. And oh, look at this, mate.
Somebody not know how to flush a toilet after they've had a shit? Disgusting!
Man, it was so bad. Oh, but we can fix it. I got out the grinder and it buzzes it off, and it came up pretty good, mate.
Really good.
Nice. The thermostat housing all looking pretty schmick. It was time to put it all back together. Now, unfortunately, eBay sent me the wrong gasket, because absolutely, of course they did. So I had to make do with old faithful gasket goo. Now, with gasket goo, you want to be pretty conservative with this stuff. Only use it lightly and spread it with your finger, because if you use too much, bits will break off and find their way into the system. Now, remember to always make sure the mating surface is completely clean. Use a razor and remove any of the remaining gasket, and to use very, very fine sandpaper, 2000 grit and above, or a scouring pad like you'd find on a sponge. Now, with the thermostat looking like one happy little Vegemite, it was with a heavy heart that I realized if the thermostat's like that, then the water pump's got to be even worse. And when you do the water pump, you might as well do the timing belt. And since the car had been sitting for 17 years, well, I assume that timing belt had seen better days. So with a deep breath and a internal reflection of what brought me to these choices in life, I decided to do the timing belt and water pump. The timing belt and water pump are both integral engine components. The timing belt allows both the camshaft and crankshaft to stay in perfect synchronization. And the water pump allows the engine to push coolant through the system to make sure it's adequately cooled. And obviously, if one of these things were to go, that would have disastrous effects for the engine.
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
Now, unfortunately, the motor in this, the B20A4, is what we call an interference engine. In the interference engines, the pistons and valves can occupy the same place, but not at the same time. So when timing is incorrect, they smash into each other and essentially detonate the engine. Whereas in non-interference, there's no connection. This is one of those jobs that if you don't know the condition of it, or when it was last checked, check it as soon as you can. Because the cost of a $120 belt is way easier than finding a new engine for a car like this. We had to remove all the accessories like air conditioning, alternator, and power steering before we could access the engine cover. For some reason yet to be known by myself, the alternator belt was a lot more difficult than it should have been. I was banging, I was crashing, but it was just too damn tight.
Yo! Prank, baby!
And yeah, of course they did. They used the wrong size belt.
Well, well, well. How the turntables...
Now with the belts off and that side of the engine all free, it was time to remove the valve cover so we could actually have a look at this engine and see how well it's been treated. And to be honest, it wasn't actually that bad. I was expecting a lot worse, to be honest, but at this point I'll take any wins I can get. And I also wasn't expecting the timing belt to be this good. I'm going to change it anyway because 17 years of sitting probably can't be good to it. But honestly, I could have run this for a little bit and not had any issues, but we're here now, we might as well get it out of there. With all the covers off, this engine's décolletage has now been revealed. It's always good practice to make sure the engine is top dead center before moving the belt. I always like to mark where the points are with the previous belt so I know how many teeth were between each mark. Rotating the crank got both cams to top dead center. Now that that's done, we can release the tension on the belt via the tensioner. And with any luck, the belt should just pop right off. And to be honest, yeah, it was fine. Now before we put it all back together, we will retime the engine again. This is just a good practice kind of thing. Now with the belt removed, we can now access the water pump. Now I can't deny, I was a little bit disappointed. I was hoping it would be a lot worse or would justify all this work, but here we are. Can't win them all. That absolutely doesn't mean we're keeping it though. With the old pump removed, now I could get to work about putting the new one in. Unfortunately, because it had been sitting for so long, a slight bit of corrosion had built up on the mating surface. It was slightly textured. It wasn't terrible, but it was noticeable. So I did as they do on the Discovery Channel and sanded it very, very lightly to get the texture as smooth as possible. With that done, I was able to install the gasket on the new pump and slot her in. I decided to blast it with some tap water to see if there was any leaks in the system, and unfortunately, my hypothesis was correct. There was a slight bit of weeping just on the bottom of the water pump, right where the worst of the corrosion had been, so I had to turn back to old faithful gasket goo to save the day once again. Now, I learned a lot of valuable lessons, especially when using gasket goo. I spent a lot of extra time being extremely gentle and making sure that the water pump was connected correctly. In this instance, I lowered it into position and then used the bolts to locate it, but didn't press it against the surface. If I pressed it against the surface and needed to move it, that would smear the gasket goo and the gasket, potentially either pinching it or creating a weak spot. I incrementally turned each bolt to make sure that there was an even amount of pressure around the whole thing. This is one of those jobs you really want to do once and do it right. I tried with the tap again, and thankfully, no leaks. She was as dry as... Yeah, I'm not going to go there. It was time to put a new timing belt on this car, and unfortunately, this is where we started running into problems. When removing the old belt, it had released some tension, so one of the camshafts had rotated slightly, and it also looked like the crank had moved a little as well. Now, according to the workshop manual, you don't want to turn either the crank or camshaft independently of one another, because you could risk putting one of the valves into one of the pistons. I was really stumped. I didn't know what to do. Thankfully, I've actually got some pretty decent friends who know what they're doing, and he offered to come give me a hand. We were able to move the camshaft by hand, then apply the belt and use the tension of the belt to hold the camshaft in place to make sure that the teeth were lined up correctly. It was honestly really fiddly trying to get it all together, especially when we had to put tension on the belt because the crank kept moving out of time. But with some perseverance and someone who actually knows what they're doing, we managed to get it pretty good. Now, I absolutely can't stress enough, if you don't know what you're doing, get help from someone who does. This job has the very real potential of breaking your engine if you don't do it correctly. So sometimes it's worth it just putting down your tools and asking some questions, than just going through and breaking something. So I crossed my fingers, put the keys in the ignition, and started her up in the hopes that we would have not destroyed anything in the process.
Confident everything's good? Like there's nothing in the way?
I can't see anything in the way.
Alright, my heart's beating 1,000 times a second. Here we go.
The car cranked heavily. No issues were found. So with a big smile on my face, it was time to finish this job once and for all. Cue the putting the thing back together montage. Now with the valve cover off, I thought it looked ugly as sin. It's clear all the old paint had worn off it, so I decided to give it a bit of love. Now when you're this close to the internals of the engine, you want to make sure you're extra careful. was all now ready to go. I can't lie, my heart was racing. Will it start smoothly and run like it did in 1989? Or will it run like absolute and I'll have to spend the next few years problem solving why? Yeah. Good girl. She had a bouncing idle. She had a sticking throttle, but trust me, we could give it the beans. And, she's a bit smoky.
Smoke weed every day. Smoke weed every day. Smoke weed every day.
Now, generally, a lot of smoke in the exhaust means that the head gasket is gone, which in this case could be a very likely possibility. But remember, this car has been sitting for 17 years, and this is its first proper run. God knows what's in that exhaust and what's in the system. There's probably a lot of carbon build-up. So we will have to keep an eye on it and play it by ear. But I'm confident. The cooling system was working, but the radiator fans weren't turning on. So I've got to do my favorite job and run some wires. But with the car up to temperature, we could now have a look at that radiator flush that we put in. And,
aerate it, warm it up. Vanilla.
oh man, we are so close to going for a test drive, but without those fans, we won't get very far. There's also a couple of administration things I need to sort out before we can drive it as well. Things like insurance and registration. Thankfully, the plates are still on there, so that makes this job a whole lot easier. With any luck, it won't need any inspection at all. But for now, he's under arrest. When you think about it, there's something so romantic about restoring old cars. Something that had been someone's pride and joy. Something that had cost them a lot of money and time to earn. They would have cherished this. Then it was left to rot. Discarded for the next. Until one day, someone like you or me found it and decided to give it a new life. To bring it back, if only for a moment. So that it can live its sunset years, knowing that someone still loves it. Yeah. It is romantic.